could the most iconic piece of Star Wars be one of the most divisive rides Disney's ever created? Getting aboard the fastest hunk of junk in the galaxy might seem like a fun ride on paper, but its execution is seemingly anything but. Millennium Falcon Smugglers Run at Disneyland and Disney's Hollywood Studios opened in 2019, taking guests on an interactive smuggling mission in the world of Star Wars. Being one of two attractions in the immersive land, Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, it took immersion and interactivity to a whole new level. Unlike other Star Wars rides like Rise of the Resistance, Star Tours, and Hyperspace Mountain, this is the one Star Wars attraction that doesn't seem to have a solid fan base. It noticeably has some of the lowest wait times among other e-ticket attractions in Disneyland. Personally, I think it should have higher wait times because it's so good, but I'll share why I think that is later on. Today, my friends, I want to share why everyone's least favorite Star Wars ride shouldn't be as divisive or as bad as you think, and why it might actually be one of Disney's better attractions at Disneyland. And trust me, there's more to this discussion than you might think. And if you haven't already, be sure to leave a like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to be notified for new videos. In 2015, it was announced that a Millennium Falcon ride would be opening in the new Star Wars land. Getting aboard and ride inside one of the most iconic ships in history would make Star Wars fans, Disney park fans, and pretty much anyone excited. You couldn't just make this your average Star Wars attraction. Something as famous as the Millennium Falcon had to be out of this world. Pun intended. In fact, one could argue that it had to be the best Star Wars ride Disney ever built. And it wasn't just the ride building massive hype, but Star Wars Galaxy's Edge was promised to be Disney's most immersive and impressive land they've ever built. We were promised we would play a vital role in shaping our very own Star Wars story. To say expectations were through the roof for Smugglers Run would be a massive understatement. It had to be big, and something guests had never seen before. So, did Disney deliver? Well, technically yeah, even if it wasn't what fans were expecting. Disney wasn't a stranger in building attractions that were interactive. They've built rides like Buzz Lightyear Astro Blasters, Toy Story Mania, and at the time were building Web Slingers, one of my personal favorites. Although Disney wanted Smugglers Run to be technically innovative, the challenge didn't seem impossible. A decade prior, Toy Story Midway Mania also had a lot of pressure to be Disney's next big attraction. This ride was part of a massive $1.2 billion makeover to save the embarrassment at the time, Disney's California Adventure. So Imagineers created the biggest control system for an attraction at that point, where hundreds of computers would power the ride's many attraction screens, gameplay experience, and special effects. Thankfully, the video game type ride was seen as an instant success. Conversely, Smugglers Run wouldn't be a simple sit-down ride where you would be moved to different screens and play a 3D video game. It would take the concept of a video game attraction to a whole new level. The thought was to go bigger and better than before, so Disney created a very impressive control system that would power the gameplay experience inside the cockpit, the video game aspect powered with Unreal Engine, and the motion of the ship itself. The ride would feature 3 ride positions that each had their own control systems.
Pilots to navigate, engineers to operate the ship, and gunners to defend the shipments. And that is where you come in.
And keep in mind that there were 2 of each position, meaning there was an individual system being controlled by every individual rider. And the crazy thing is, there's even more to this ride system. When designing the attraction, the Millennium Falcon was supposed to feature multiple destinations similar to Star Tours. The digital technology would not only feature different planets from the Star Wars universe, but you would be able to complete different missions in said planets. And depending on how good or bad the team performed, you'd either succeed in completing your mission or completely destroy the ship and fail to make it back to the planet Batuu in one piece. That made for great rewritability, ensuring guests would have a different ride through the galaxy each and every time. So this Millennium Falcon ride sounds like it'd be a smash hit. Clearly Imagineers were determined to create one of the most impressive Star Wars rides for the new land. Why don't people like it all that much? Don't get me wrong, there's people out there who genuinely enjoy this attraction, but there's many factors that might let guests think this ride is just fine. Maybe even awful, even when that isn't the case. Before Galaxy's Edge opened, Disney made many promises on what we could expect for the land that didn't end up becoming a reality. Like those roaming droids and other wandering Star Wars characters that never appeared, the Millennium Falcon didn't have multiple missions or planets to take part of. It also didn't have the open world aspect that was initially promised. Instead of flying anywhere we could on our mission, the Falcon followed a linear path for this ride's objective. And if that wasn't enough, Millennium Falcon Smugglers Run would be the only ride open with the land, as Star Wars Rise of the Resistance faced too many hiccups to operate consistently and had to be delayed. So there was even more pressure for this Millennium Falcon ride to be super impressive, since there weren't any other rides to do. The multiple planet concept was cut down to the one planet, Corellia. As Hondo Ohnaka explains in the pre-show, we need to collect containers of coaxium. After we board the ship and the pilots learn how to steer the Falcon, we make the jump to light speed. And that's when we get to our destination, Corellia, where this massive train containing containers of coaxium is on the loose. Gunners shoot their blasters and engineers click those buttons. Very exciting jobs, I know. As the Falcon is forced to take a tumble and it hits the floor, one container of coaxium will fall in front of the ship, meaning we've cleared our mission. This will happen on every ride no matter what. It's only now when the optional mission begins, we have to follow the train again and shoot it down, so that we can get a second container specifically so Hondo Ohnaka can get a profit for himself. This is where the team will either successfully shoot the ship down and collect the goods, or they'll crash too many times, steer away from the train, or simply not shoot the train enough times where you have to escape the planet without extra coaxium. After making the jump to lightspeed, we make it back to the planet Batuu and either collect 1 or 2 containers of coaxium. It's at that point where you remember this video game ride actually has a scoring system that'll show how good or bad the team performed. If you perform poorly, the corridors toward the exit will sound all messed up and look kinda jank, which I think is a really neat touch. But yeah, that's the whole ride. It doesn't sound like a bad storyline for an attraction, and to most people it isn't. So why does it have a mixed reputation? Well, before I list some of the cons, let me talk about a big strength of this ride. Everything before the actual ride is pretty much perfect. This has gotta be one of the best facades in the California parks. The ride's hidden behind the towering spires of Batuu, and a giant Millennium Falcon is parked in the front. Once you enter the queue, you get to see all the details of the Falcon and hear the engine and mechanics in the area. Entering inside Ohnaka Transport Solutions, you're greeted with probably one of the most impressive queues in all of Disneyland. This might actually be the best queue in the entire park if I'm being honest. So much attention to detail, so many things to look at, and you're even greeted by an impressive Hondo Ohnaka animatronic figure.
Hello, my friends. I am Hondo Ohnaka, and this is Ohnaka Transport Solutions. Today, I am offering the opportunity of a lifetime. I need flight crews to transport this valuable merchandise across the galaxy.
At the time, this was one of Disney's most impressive animatronic figures ever. After the pre-show where Hondo briefs you on your mission, you'd enter this long corridor that felt like it was ripped straight out of the Star Wars films. From the corridor to the waiting area to the second briefing, 10 out of 10, perfect. But the best part was actually getting to be inside the Millennium Falcon. I remember my first time before the ride even started, I was all giddy and hyped to be inside the ship. There's so many flashing buttons and switches and levers that we'd eventually interact with. There's nothing really like it anywhere else in the park. This is where you realize there's so much potential for this attraction, as everything before the actual ride is a home run. It's not until you've done this same ride a few times and the ride begins where you notice some of the ride's problems. Of course, that's true with any ride the more you do it, but for a simulator attraction, the issues might seem more apparent. Since we were promised multiple destinations and only had the one mission for a long time, the ride didn't exactly seem re-rideable for many guests. When we compare this ride to the original Star Tours, that point doesn't seem to hold a lot of weight since that ride was the same ride every time. The difference is that Star Tours had an impressive storyline that had many memorable moments that felt like it came straight out of the original Star Wars movies. The storyline for Smugglers Run, where you follow a train to collect coaxium, isn't bad, but it's not exactly super amazing to be its own ride. In fact, since we're on the subject of Star Tours, another glaring difference between it and Smugglers Run is that guests are casual observers in Star Tours, as you have a captain that pilots your starspeeder, but in Smugglers Run, the pilots get to control a ship and where it goes on our mission. That's great and all, but if you've piloted before, then it makes this ride sorta dull. You already know where to go and what to do. If you're a good pilot, it's not exactly the most fun having to just line up behind the train for most of the ride. And since the control system for the attraction controls the intensity of your experience, it makes for a very tame mission. You'd have to purposely crash the ship to have a really wild experience. That lies another issue. I know there's quite a few people that would like to be in control of their smuggling mission, but since not everyone can pilot the ship, they're either stuck with the mundane task of clicking one button to shoot down the train, or look to the side clicking the buttons and missing the action. For me, I don't think it's quite the biggest deal to look away very briefly to press buttons when you're the engineer, and I actually prefer to be the engineer if I'm not a pilot since I'm at least doing something. When you're gunner, you're kinda just along for the ride, and if the pilots aren't lined up behind the train, you can't exactly shoot many targets anyway. You can shoot down some ships, I suppose. There's not much else to it. It's a shame since so much work went into designing this attraction, and the end result wasn't exactly the hit Disney was hoping for. Even newly appointed Disney CEO Josh D'Amaro admitted semi-defeat with this attraction. Josh D'Amaro stated that guests like it, but they don't love it. Of course, that's not to say the ride was terrible, but it meant that the ride didn't live up to the potential or fully meet the guest expectations for the attraction. But thankfully, as we learned in 2024, Millennium Falcon Smugglers Run wouldn't be the same any longer.
I can bring you in warm, or I can bring you in cold.
As we were initially promised, we would be able to board the Millennium Falcon and get to visit various planets. We would also be joined by the Mandalorian and Grogu on this new smuggling mission. Josh D'Amaro played a big part in making the attraction way better than it already was with the Mandalorian update. Or for some people, make this a ride actually worth waiting in line for. It's good that Josh and Imagineers saw the potential of Smugglers Run and decided to retool the ride after the one lone mission of Corellia didn't really move the needle for guests like they were hoping for. Not only that, but the positions aboard the spacecraft were said to be different as well. Engineers would get the opportunity to interact with Grogu himself while we're on our smuggling mission. As Josh stated, this attraction would ensure that no one on the ride would merely be a passenger. It would give each person agency, the chance to influence the outcome, demonstrate skill, and feel part of the story. So when we learned this new information and learned of the expanded timeline coming to Disneyland in 2025, I actually got more interested in this attraction. For a while, I grew bored of the ride's one mission and never bothered with the ride. In fact, since there was no desire to ride this attraction, I didn't really wander about Galaxy's Edge except to ride Rise of the Resistance and bail since I felt that was the one thing worth doing in the land. But in anticipation for the update, I ended up watching The Mandalorian on Disney Plus for the very first time since I knew he was coming to the attraction. If you've watched this show, you know how awesome it is. So after watching the show, I was willing to give Millennium Falcon Smugglers Run another shot. It had been years since I boarded the ship, but since the wait time's so low most of the time, I decided, I'll hop in line. I literally didn't stop moving until we got in the briefing room with Hondo, and since there were so little people, I kept walking and walking all the way down that corridor where you're assigned your position. Even if it had been years since riding Smugglers Run, I did remember the concept of following the train to retrieve coaxium, and since I was a gunner, I was kinda just existing, watching the action unfold in front of me. But there was one thing that changed my perspective on this ride when compared to previous rides. Before, I was too focused on the mission at hand and trying to successfully complete the mission. But since I was more of a casual observer this time around, I was more aware of everyone's reactions aboard the Falcon. Oh, we sure hit everything on this flight. But hearing the pilots scream and curse at each other because they didn't know what they were doing and the engineers just busting up laughing at their chaos, it brought its own fun on this attraction. Instead of focusing on the action, I saw the ride as just a game that everyone got to play. I enjoyed it almost like a multiplayer game everyone plays on the couch at home, where everyone's yelling at each other and laughing, having a good time, and it's still a ride at the end of the day. So it's equal parts thrilling and equal parts hilarious. When I exited the ship, I had this grin on my face and said, I want to do that again. So, because the line was 5 minutes, I got back in line. This time, I was partnered up with this happy family. Everyone except for the dad had been on the ride. He was one of the pilots and I got to be the engineer for the first time in a while. Just like the first ride, we crashed a lot. Despite that, the energy from the family brought another smile to my face. Everyone wasn't exactly working together, but they all wanted to win. And since the pilots went everywhere except behind the train, it made the ride even more funny for everyone. Very recently, I got to ride with another family who offered their pilot seat for me. That was really exciting since it was one of the few times I was given that opportunity to be a pilot. Though we had a really great experience working together, it wasn't exactly as fun as the other rides since we lined up behind the train easily. So as a result, the flaw of being an excellent pilot resulting in a tame experience was very much still there. But hey, I've been on the ride more times since then, and I've had similar experiences where everyone's just having a good time. I'm just soaking in the vibes of the fun while occasionally pressing the buttons and flipping switches to my side when I'm engineer. I haven't run into a group yet that took it too seriously to the point they'd yell at people for not doing their job correctly, or a group that was hostile towards anyone. Personally, if I did, my outlook might change, but at the end of the day, it's just a ride. Even if you don't get your containers of coaxium, or if the pilots crash too many times, or no one's shooting any targets, or whatever, the ride's more about the fun inside the cockpit than anything else. Having a fun group, even with strangers, is key to really enjoying this attraction. Of course, the ride needs more missions. There's only so much fun you could have with one mission. The mission is too linear to differentiate each ride through, so from this perspective, I understand why people might write this off as a letdown. It really just doesn't live up to the full potential of what a Millennium Falcon ride can be. Thankfully, we'll have more than one mission to pick from with the Mandalorian update, and hopefully there's a way to differentiate the ride experience more than before, so it doesn't grow stale too quickly. Of course, if it is great, that'll mean higher wait times for this attraction. But as I've stated before, I think this ride does deserve higher wait times, and it deserves this new update. Millennium Falcon Smugglers Run has one of the best queues in the entire park, arguably the best queue, and it has one of the most impressive and innovative ride systems ever seen for any video game style attraction, and really, attraction in general. And while the ride itself might not be the best Star Wars ride Disney's created, I don't think it's as meh as some people think. After I went in with a more open mind and looked beyond the action happening in front of me, that's when I learned the secret to loving this attraction. The energy inside the cockpit and the fun everyone's having, despite the results of your mission, is what this ride's all about. And I'm sure with the update featuring the Mandalorian and Grogu and new destinations for us to travel in, the ride will finally reach its true potential and be one of Disneyland's greatest attractions.